The sun dipped over the affluent suburbs of East Ridge, Accra, casting golden streaks across the marble pillars of the Mensah estate. Inside, Amina paced the living room, her heels clicking sharply against imported tiles. Her husband, Kwame, sat silently on the leather couch, his eyes heavy with frustration and fatigue. He had just returned from yet another fruitless day searching for business partners to invest in his tech startup. Amina, clad in a silk robe and diamond earrings, folded her arms and glared at him. "I didn't sign up for this," she snapped. "You promised me a life of comfort, not dreams and delays." Kwame's mouth tightened, but he said nothing. They had grown up in the same neighborhood, and she once loved his ambition. But now, surrounded by luxury she felt entitled to, Amina saw only his lack. Kwame stood and walked slowly toward her, his voice calm but firm. "You know I'm trying, Amina. I just need more time. The deals are close, and the app is nearly complete. This isn't failure, it's the process." But she waved him off. "We've been married for 3 years, Kwame. 3 years of your process. I'm done waiting." Her words cut deeper than a knife. She had once believed in him, but the sparkle of her father's wealth had reshaped her desires. Her parents had warned her he was beneath her, and now she believed them. "I want a divorce," she said flatly. Kwame blinked, pain flickering in his eyes. He saw no tears in hers. Later that night, Kwame packed his few belongings into a duffel bag and walked out of the estate. No driver. No goodbye. He didn't even look back at the mansion he once called home. As he walked through the darkening streets, the echoes of Amina's words played in his mind like a broken record. Poor men don't deserve rich wives. It wasn't the lack of love that ended them. It was the lack of patience. Amina had married potential but divorced process. And Kwame? He had nothing now but his pride and the blueprints of an app that could change Africa's tech space. "I'll make it," he whispered to himself, "even if it's just to prove her wrong." At her father's mansion the next morning, Amina sat with her parents over breakfast. Mr. Mensah, a man who built his empire on logistics and legacy, beamed with approval. "Finally," he said, "you've come to your senses. That boy was draining your shine." Her mother nodded in agreement. Amina tried to smile, but felt an odd hollowness inside her. She had chosen her family's approval over her heart, but something didn't feel like victory. "You need someone who matches your worth," her father continued, tapping the newspaper. "You'll see. It was for the best." Amina sipped her orange juice, staring out at the garden. Somewhere in her chest, regret scratched gently against her ribs, but she buried it. Rich girls didn't cry over poor boys. That was the rule. Kwame rented a single room in Medina, far from the glossy life he had shared with Amina. The walls were cracked, the tap leaked, and the ceiling fan clicked with every rotation. Still, it was his. With nothing but his laptop, a mattress, and unwavering belief, he plunged into work. Day turned to night, and night to day, but Kwame barely noticed. He coded like a man possessed. His app, Mobi Clinic, aimed to connect remote patients with mobile healthcare providers. An idea that was once dismissed in conference rooms now bloomed in his solitude. He used second-hand tech forums and scraped together funds by freelancing for local businesses. Every rejection became fuel. Every small win, a fire. Meanwhile, Amina adjusted to life back in her father's world. She was once a wife, but now she was a trophy. Her father paraded her to galas and boardrooms, praising her for correcting her mistake. He arranged introductions with suitors, men with pedigrees, portfolios, and private jets. But Amina felt strangely out of place among them. Their conversations were transactional, not personal. She missed the simplicity of laughter over fried yam, the quiet of late-night brainstorming sessions with Kwame. But she buried those thoughts deep, where even she couldn't reach them. 2 years passed like a breath in Harmattan wind. Moby Clinic launched quietly, but spread like wildfire. Rural communities embraced it. Then urban clinics partnered with it. Investors took notice. By the end of the 3rd year, a major South African health tech firm bought a 40% stake, and Kwame became a multi-millionaire overnight. But instead of buying cars or flaunting his wealth, Kwame stayed focused. He moved into a modest apartment in East Legon, built a small team, and began working on his second venture, a logistics tech platform. He no longer thought of Amina every day, but when he did, it wasn't with anger. It was clarity. She didn't leave him because he failed. She left because she couldn't see the future he was building. At a health tech summit in Kigali, Kwame delivered a keynote that shook the audience. CNN Africa aired it. Forbes profiled him. Suddenly, the boy Amina's father had called a dreamer without direction was now being hailed as the future of African innovation. Back in Accra, the Mensah family watched in disbelief. Mr. Mensah scowled as the television played Kwame's speech. "He was under my roof," he muttered. Amina remained quiet, her heart beating unevenly. Her father had built empires, but Kwame had built impact. And for the first time in years, she couldn't help but wonder, had she chosen comfort over greatness? Kwame sat across from a panel of stern-looking executives inside the boardroom of AfriLink Holdings, his second venture now the most talked-about logistics startup in West Africa. The board had just approved a bold new strategy to acquire legacy logistics companies struggling with digital transformation. On the top of their list? Mensah Freight and Logistics. The irony didn't escape him. "Are we sure about this one?" his CFO asked, peering at the files. "They're old school, resistant to tech. The founder's reputation is stubborn." Kwame gave a knowing smile. "That's exactly why we need them. They have infrastructure. We have innovation. It's the perfect disruption." No one in the room knew about his past with the founder's daughter, and Kwame didn't volunteer it. This wasn't revenge. It was business. But something in him stirred. Back at the Mensah estate, Mr. Mensah was frustrated. Profits were down, competitors were automating faster, and he had ignored too many digital warning signs. His daughter Amina now sat on the company's board as a ceremonial figure, but she had no say in real decisions. She had tried to bring up digitizing their operations before, but her father scoffed. "This is not Silicon Valley," he had snapped. "We don't need apps, we need trucks." But now, the numbers were sobering. Then came the email. An acquisition proposal from AfriLink Holdings. The amount offered was generous, but what stunned Mr. Mensah most was the name of the CEO, Kwame Ajay. Amina saw the email before her father did. She froze, her heart hammering. It had been over 3 years since she last saw that name. She clicked open the offer, scanning every detail with trembling fingers. The numbers made sense. The strategy was sound, but she couldn't believe it. Kwame had become the man her father said he would never be. She quickly printed the email and walked into her father's office. He looked up over his glasses. "What now?" She placed the paper before him. "This offer is real. It's from Kwame." Her father's eyes widened. He read the document slowly, lips tightening. "This boy thinks he can buy me out?" he barked. "Over my dead body." But Amina, staring at the floor, whispered, "Maybe it's time, Daddy." That evening, Amina sat on the balcony alone, wine glass in hand, staring into the city's lights. Her world was unraveling. She had traded love for legacy, yet the man she abandoned now stood at the helm of her family's future. She tried to remind herself that she had made the right choice. After all, Kwame had been struggling, and no woman wanted to suffer. But her conscience no longer agreed. She wondered how he would act if they ever met again. Was he angry? Indifferent? Would he even acknowledge her? One thing was clear. Kwame had returned, Not as the boy she left, but as a man her father now feared. And Amina? She was no longer sure which side she was on. The boardroom of Mensa Freight and Logistics buzzed with tension as the acquisition meeting was set to begin. Mr. Mensa, flanked by his long-time board members, looked like a general preparing for war. Amina sat quietly beside him, her expression unreadable. When the doors opened and Kwame walked in, time seemed to slow. He wore a tailored navy blue suit, his posture tall, his eyes calm but firm. Amina's breath caught. He was different, sharper, colder, more confident. He greeted the room professionally, locking eyes with Mr. Mensa first, then finally, briefly, with her. "Thank you for your time," Kwame began. "Let's talk about the future. Not a trace of bitterness. Just business." Mr. Mensa wasted no time. "So, you think money gives you the right to come back and buy what you once begged to be part of?" His voice was biting. Kwame didn't flinch. "No, sir. Money doesn't give me the right. Strategy does. Your company is bleeding because the market changed and you didn't. I didn't come to gloat. I came with a solution." The room fell silent. For the first time, the power dynamic had shifted. Mr. Mensa leaned back, wounded pride evident. Amina watched Kwame, amazed by how composed he remained. There was no resentment in his tone, just truth. After the presentation, most board members were impressed. The proposal promised a merger that would retain existing staff, modernize the fleet, and expand regional dominance. "We can either adapt now or vanish slowly," Kwame said plainly. Amina had heard him pitch before, years ago, in their tiny apartment. But this was different. There was power in his words now, shaped by pain and perseverance. When the board requested a brief recess, Mr. Mensa pulled Amina aside. "You can't be okay with this," he hissed. "He's the same boy who wasn't man enough for you." Amina's voice was soft but sure. "No, Daddy. He's not the same. And maybe he always was more than we saw." Later that night, Kwame sat alone at a rooftop lounge, watching the cityscape shimmer below. His assistant had sent word that the board would likely approve the offer by week's end. It should have been a moment of celebration, but instead, he felt hollow. Seeing Amina again had stirred feelings he thought were buried. Not love, at least not anymore, but something heavier. Closure that hadn't yet closed. He remembered the nights he spent trying to prove himself to her, the weight of being almost enough. Now, with everything in his grasp, he realized that success didn't erase pain. It only outgrew it. He raised a glass quietly to the sky. To letting go, finally. Amina lay awake in her room long after the house had gone silent. The glow of her bedside lamp cast long shadows across the walls as she stared at the ceiling. Seeing Kwame again had unearthed memories she'd buried too deeply. She remembered his late nights, his worn-out laptop, the meals they skipped just to save for data. She remembered how he used to say, "We're building something bigger than money, Amina. We're building a story." At the time, she didn't understand it. She only saw what they lacked. Now, years later, he'd written that story without her. And the irony? Her father's empire was now one of his chapters. The next morning, she requested a meeting with Kwame alone. It was held in one of the neutral corporate lounges downtown. He arrived right on time, professionally detached but not cold. Amina stood as he entered, unsure of how to greet him. They settled into their seats, and for a moment, silence stretched between them like an invisible wall. "Thank you for coming," she began. Kwame nodded. "I'm here because business requires it." His tone was firm, respectful, but emotionally distant. "I didn't ask you here to talk about the company," she said quietly. "I asked to talk about us, or what's left of it." Kwame exhaled slowly, eyes fixed on the window. "There is no us, Amina. You ended that when I needed you most." Now, there's just history and a business deal. She nodded, accepting the sting. I know I hurt you, she admitted. And I didn't understand then. I was afraid of the struggle, of the unknown. But you always saw the end from the beginning. I was too blind to wait. Kwame finally looked at her. You weren't blind. You were honest about your limits. And I learned to stop expecting people to dream with me when their hearts aren't wired for storms. His words weren't bitter, just truthful. As she left the meeting, Amina felt like she was walking away from two things at once. The boy she once loved, and the man she could never have again. In the following days, the board of Mensa Freight unanimously approved the acquisition. Mr. Mensa was livid but outvoted. The deal was sealed, and Kwame officially became the largest shareholder. For the first time in her life, Amina's world wasn't defined by her father's decisions or her family's wealth. It was defined by watching the man she rejected become the very thing she once claimed he'd never be. She didn't cry. She couldn't. All she could do was watch. The Mensa Freight office had changed overnight. Staff wore expressions of cautious curiosity as new systems were installed and younger tech-savvy professionals began onboarding the digital transformation. Kwame walked the corridors like a quiet storm. Polite but commanding. Employees whispered in corners. That's the new boss. The one Mr. Mensa's daughter used to be married to. In meetings, he made no mention of his past with Amina. His focus was laser-sharp. Efficiency, innovation, market expansion. Even those who had once doubted his potential now stood in silent admiration. What they saw wasn't vengeance. It was vision. And it was undeniably working. Mr. Mensa, however, refused to go down quietly. Though the sale was final, he remained on the board as a ceremonial figurehead. In a tense executive meeting, he challenged Kwame on every policy change, nitpicking and undermining him in front of staff. This is not how we built this company, he snapped after a presentation on automation. Kwame responded without flinching. And that's why you're losing it. The world changed, sir. You chose tradition over transformation. I'm here to fix that. The board backed Kwame. Slowly, Mr. Mensa's voice became an echo, loud but powerless. The more he fought, the more irrelevant he appeared. One afternoon, as Kwame reviewed logistics reports in his office, a knock interrupted him. Amina stepped in, holding a brown envelope. These are some of the old staff files. Thought you might need them. He took the envelope without looking up. Thank you. She didn't move. Kwame, she said softly, can I ask you something real? He paused, then met her eyes. Would you still have done all this if we hadn't? If I hadn't left? His answer came without hesitation. Yes. Because my dream was never tied to your acceptance. You just didn't see it yet. Her throat tightened. He was no longer the boy she doubted. He was the man she couldn't forget. Amina walked out, her heels clicking like punctuation marks on regret. Outside, the city bustled on, unaware of the quiet wars waging in boardrooms and hearts. She had everything she thought she wanted: status, security, pedigree. But none of it felt like victory. Kwame hadn't humiliated her or sought revenge. He didn't need to. His success was its own testimony, and her silence was its own confession. For the first time, she understood that sometimes the cruelest consequence isn't being hated. It's being forgotten by someone you once underestimated. And Amina knew, deep in her chest, that no apology would ever buy her way back into his future. It was a chilly Friday morning when the new signage was unveiled outside the company headquarters. AfriLink Mensa Logistics gleamed in bold, metallic letters across the building's facade. Staff gathered outside, murmuring among themselves. Some applauded, others watched in silence. A few feet away, Mr. Mensa stood stiffly beside his daughter, eyes dark with defiance. You see that, he said. That name shouldn't be there. I built this company from scratch. Amina said nothing. Her silence had grown louder than his words. She wasn't sure whether to defend her father or apologize for once agreeing with him. All she could do was watch history change, letter by letter. Inside, Kwame stood in front of a display wall featuring company milestones and the portraits of past CEOs. His would be the next framed photo. He stared at the wall, recalling all the nights he'd passed this building on his way home from odd jobs. Hustling, doubting, praying. Now he owned the very institution that once represented rejection and elitism to him. A staff member approached and handed him the final branding file. "Should we remove the Mensa name from the wall eventually?" she asked. Kwame shook his head. "No, we build on legacies, even the broken ones. Let them see the full story." That same afternoon, Amina received a call from an old university friend. "Is it true?" the friend asked breathlessly. "That Kwame bought your father's company?" Amina hesitated, then said, "Yes, it's true." The friend was quiet for a moment, then chuckled. "You always said he had nothing to offer." Amina winced. The words sounded crueler now than when she first uttered them. She ended the call politely and sat down in the lounge of her family home. Her gaze wandered to the empty spot on the wall where her engagement photo with Kwame once hung. Her mother had taken it down the week after the divorce. Amina now realized that photo had held more value than all her diamond rings. That evening, at an internal corporate dinner celebrating the merger, Amina was invited, not as a guest of honor, but as a symbolic bridge between the two legacies. She dressed modestly, choosing grace over glamour. When Kwame stepped on stage to give his speech, she felt a lump rise in her throat. He spoke of vision, growth, and resilience. Not once did he mention betrayal, rejection, or pain. His dignity, his restraint, it humbled her. As he ended the speech to a round of applause, their eyes met briefly across the room. He gave her a small nod, neither cold nor warm, but final. A chapter had closed. She just hadn't realized it until now. The next morning, Kwame's face was on the cover of Business Gold Africa, the headline bold. "From rejection to revolution, the man who bought his past." Inside was a full interview. Photos of him in sleek offices, speaking at conferences, even a throwback of him selling electronics from a roadside table. It was raw, authentic, and powerful. One quote stood out. "Sometimes closed doors are the best favor the world can give you, because they force you to build your own house." Amina read it in her bedroom, her fingers tightening around the pages. The man she once dismissed was now a continental symbol of resilience. Later that day, Amina was scheduled to meet with a women's business panel where she was to speak on vision in partnership. It felt ironic. What could she possibly say that wasn't stained by her own failure to see vision when it stood beside her years ago? She stood on that stage, the lights hot on her skin, and for the first time, she spoke differently. "I once had a partner with vision," she began. "I didn't recognize it, and I paid for that blindness. So today, I don't speak as an expert. I speak as a witness of what happens when pride overshadows purpose." Her speech went viral, not because of who she was, but because of her honesty. Many praised her vulnerability. Others criticized her for speaking about Kwame when he wasn't there to respond. But Kwame didn't react publicly. In private, he watched the video once and closed the browser. He had no hatred, just distance. His phone rang, and it was a client from Kenya confirming a major logistics contract. "Congratulations, sir," his assistant beamed. "That makes AfriLink Mensa the largest independently owned logistics brand in East and West Africa." He smiled faintly. The world was opening to him now, but the door back to his past remained shut by choice. Meanwhile, Mr. Mensa's health began to decline. Stress, compounded by age, had chipped away at his once formidable presence. Amina stayed by his side, watching her father grapple with the consequences of pride. One evening, as they sat quietly, he said, "He was good for you." "I didn't see it." She nodded. "Neither did I. And now it's too late." He looked at her, defeated. "You may not get him back, but learn from this. Value isn't always loud. Sometimes it comes in humble packages and builds empires when nurtured." That night, Amina wept not just for what was lost, but for the wisdom gained far too late. Amina sat in the family garden, surrounded by hibiscus shrubs her mother had planted decades ago. The air was still, but inside her, a storm brewed quietly. She scrolled through photos of Kwame's recent award ceremony. He had just been named Entrepreneur of the Year by the African Economic Forum. His acceptance speech had made headlines again. Never chase applause. Chase purpose. It stung, not because he was successful, but because he had once tried to bring her along. She had mistaken his simplicity for inadequacy, not knowing he was a map to a destiny she never learned to read. Across the city, Kwame met with his strategic team, finalizing details for an international expansion. He'd be relocating to South Africa for a year to oversee the launch of AfriLink's southern hub. Amid the discussion, one of his partners asked, "How do you stay so grounded with all this success?" Kwame smiled and said, "Because I remember the days I had nothing, and someone who claimed to love me chose to leave. Humility became my anchor." There was no venom in his voice, just memory. He'd moved beyond bitterness, but his heart had grown a gate, beautiful, tall, and closed to the past. Back at the Mensa residence, Amina found herself sitting in her late mother's room. She opened drawers she hadn't touched in years and found a box labeled Amina and Kwame. Inside were old letters, a photo of them barefoot in the rain, laughing over roasted corn, and a torn receipt from the first grocery they visited as newlyweds. She held each item like sacred scripture. Her chest ached, not from longing, but from clarity. She hadn't just lost a man. She'd lost a once-in-a-lifetime kind of love. And the cruel thing about time is that it never turns around for those who waited too long. That evening, she wrote a letter, not to rekindle, not to beg, but to apologize. "I didn't see you then, and I don't expect anything now. I just needed you to know I finally understand." She delivered it herself to the receptionist at Kwame's office, who promised to pass it on. Days passed with no response. Then one morning, she received a small envelope. Inside was a note in Kwame's handwriting. "I appreciate your words. May life be kind to you from here on. Kwame." No bitterness, no invitation, just closure. And that was when she knew it was truly the end. 1 year later, AfriLink Mensa Logistics had grown into a Pan-African powerhouse. Its name appeared on highways, ports, and airports across the continent. In South Africa, Kwame stood in a towering glass building overlooking Johannesburg. He had just closed a landmark partnership with a European supply chain conglomerate. Investors flew in just to shake his hand. A reporter asked during an interview, "What fuels your drive?" He paused, gazing out the window before answering, "Memory. And the desire to never return to a life where my worth was questioned for being poor." The room went quiet. His scars were no longer wounds. They were wings. Back in Accra, the old Mensa mansion had fallen into disrepair. Mr. Mensa passed on quietly, his funeral attended by a few former business associates and close family. Amina inherited the house, but it felt more like a monument to past mistakes than a home. She now taught young women about emotional intelligence in relationships, often drawing from her story, carefully, without bitterness. "If someone has vision, don't mock the seed just because it hasn't bloomed yet," she'd say. Her audiences always applauded, unaware that her lessons were etched from the pages of her own regret. She was healing, but wholeness had its limits. On his last visit to Ghana before relocating permanently to Cape Town, Kwame drove by the old neighborhood he once shared with Amina. Nothing had changed much. Same bumpy roads, same noisy vendors, same corner where they once danced under the rain. He parked for a moment, stepped out, and let the wind pass over him like a blessing. He didn't feel angry anymore. He didn't feel nostalgic either. He just felt free. Life had come full circle, and instead of revenge, it had offered him reinvention. He had lost love, but found legacy. And that, in his mind, was the better trade. Later that evening, a charity gala was held in his honor. Amina attended, seated far in the crowd. When Kwame took the stage, he smiled, confident and calm. "We are not defined by who leaves us," he said, "but by who we become after they're gone." His words landed like scripture. In the shadows, Amina smiled, tears glistening but heart steady. She would never hold his hand again, but she had learned to hold herself. He, on the other hand, had walked through fire, not to burn bridges, but to forge them, and from the ashes of rejection, he built a throne. Thanks for watching, family. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications for more stories from us. Also share this story with your loved ones.